The air in the lawyer's office was thick, too thick. It smelled like old leather, expensive cologne, and the faint, bitter scent of fear. Not my fear, theirs. My hands were sweating. I kept rubbing my thumb against the cheap plastic handle of my worn purse, a nervous tic I hadn't shaken since I was 10. I sat in a chair that was too large, sinking into the plush, dark green velvet, feeling swallowed by the room and by the weight of the people around me. Aunt Carol was directly across the mahogany table. Her face was tight, stretched smooth by weekly trips to the spa. She wore a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my car, and her perfect blonde hair was pulled back so severely it made her look like she was perpetually bracing for impact. She wouldn't look at me directly. Instead, she kept examining her manicure, occasionally shooting glances past my left ear, as if I were a smudge on the wallpaper she was trying to ignore. She cleared her throat, a loud, performative noise that meant, "I am important, and you are not." "Is Mr. Harrison even on time?" Carol asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She addressed the question to Uncle Robert, who sat beside her, puffing his chest out in a dark pinstripe suit. Robert didn't answer Carol. He just checked the solid gold watch strapped to his thick wrist. 10:02 a.m., 2 minutes late. He sighed, a sound of profound corporate suffering. Robert had spent the last 3 weeks treating my grandmother's death like a merger negotiation. I shifted in my seat. The office was quiet, but the silence wasn't restful. It was pressurized. Every sound felt amplified. The faint whir of the air conditioning struggling against the late July heat outside, the distant rumble of a truck on Fifth Avenue, the sickening rhythm of my own pulse pounding in my ears. I was the only one in the room who hadn't dressed for a funeral or a bank meeting. I wore a plain black dress, cotton, slightly faded from too many washes. It was the only black item I owned that wasn't threadbare. My shoes pinched my toes. They had been a gift from Grandma Martha 5 years ago. Comfortable then, but the leather had hardened, and now every movement was a small stab of pain. I didn't dare take them off. They wouldn't stop talking about the house. "The acreage alone," Robert muttered, not looking at anyone in particular. "Even conservatively, the property tax assessment went up 40% last year. The land is worth a fortune now that the city is pushing development out toward Westchester." Carol nodded vigorously, already spending the money in her head. "We should sell it quickly. Don't let it sit. We can't afford the upkeep if we split it 5 ways anyway. Better to liquidate." 5 ways. They counted themselves. Carol, Robert, my mother, their sister Jane, who was conspicuously absent, claiming a migraine, and Robert's 2 adult children, Tiffany and Brandon, who sat on the far side of the room looking bored and entitled. They never counted me. I was present. I was in the room. I was breathing the same stale, expensive air, but in their tally, I was always 0. An equation error, a clerical oversight. I leaned back, trying to disappear into the velvet. I could feel the heat radiating off Carol's expensive perfume, something floral, sickeningly sweet, trying to mask the bitterness beneath. I closed my eyes for a second. The exhaustion of the last few weeks had settled deep into my bones. Grandma Martha's death had been slow, drawn out and painful. I was the one who sat with her every night. I was the one who changed the sheets. I was the one who held the basin when she was sick. Where were Carol and Robert then? They called, usually during business hours, to ask if she had signed the updated financial disclosure forms. "She always said," Carol began, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "that she wanted the home to stay in the family line." "You know," Robert hummed in agreement. The implication hung in the air like dust motes in the shaft of sunlight slanting through the high window. Family line. They didn't have to say the words. I heard them every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every time a family photo was taken. "You're adopted." The phrase wasn't just a fact. It was a punishment. It was a brand. I remembered standing outside the frame of a perfect summer photo when I was 8. Grandma Martha had insisted I be in it, pulling me close. But Robert had elbowed me gently, a calculated move, just as the flash went off. Later, when the prints came back, I was a blurry shadow on the edge, quickly cropped out by my mother, Jane. "It looks cleaner this way, Emma. We need a clean image for the mantle." Clean, meaning pure blood, meaning not me. Tiffany, Robert's 20-year-old daughter was scrolling through her phone. She was dressed like a fashion model on her day off, perfectly distressed jeans and a silk camisole. She looked up, caught my eye for a split second, and wrinkled her nose, returning immediately to her screen. I felt a familiar, hot burn rise up my neck. I wished I had stayed home. I wished I had ignored the terse, formal email from Mr. Harrison's office, the one addressed simply to all named parties concerning the estate of Martha B. Hayes. I knew I was only a named party because Grandma had forced it. Martha had been the only bridge, the only sanity, the only person who saw me, Emma Hayes, as something more than a perpetual house guest who never left. "Don't worry about them, sweetie," Grandma had whispered to me last winter, her breath thin and warm against my ear as we sat by the fire. "They're just people who think money is thicker than blood. They don't know the first thing about real family." I held on to that memory like a life raft. The door finally opened. Mr. Harrison entered the room. He was a small man, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver hair slicked back perfectly. He carried a leather briefcase that looked exactly like the one Robert carried, only Harrison's looked heavier, weighted with fate. He offered a grave, professional nod to everyone, a nod that held no warmth and no sorrow. This was a transaction for him. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice dry and precise. He didn't waste a second on condolences. "I know this is a difficult time. A difficult time for them, maybe, because the inheritance was delayed. For me, the difficult time was watching the woman who raised me suffer and die. The relief now was tainted with a profound, terrifying loneliness." Harrison placed the briefcase on the table. The click of the latch echoed loudly in the room. He pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a heavy rubber band and a separate, smaller manila envelope. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the room to make sure everyone was present. His eyes skimmed over me just as everyone else's did, acknowledging my existence as a legal necessity, not a person. "Before we proceed to the last will and testament of Mrs. Martha B. Hayes," Harrison began, setting a slow, deliberate pace, "I must confirm the executor of the estate, as designated by the deceased, is present and accepts the duties." Robert immediately sat up straighter, smoothing his tie. This was his moment. He had been lobbying for this position for years, promising efficiency and market-smart liquidation. "I am ready, Mr. Harrison," Robert declared, a slight tremor of excitement in his voice. Harrison looked down at his notes. The deceased designated her only daughter, Jane Hayes McPherson, as the primary executor. "Since Mrs. McPherson is not here today, we move to the secondary designation." Robert's face fell slightly, but he quickly recovered. "That would be me then." "Her son, Robert." Harrison looked up, his expression utterly neutral. "No, Mr. Hayes. The secondary executor designated here, following Jane, is Ms. Emma Hayes." The air pressure in the room seemed to drop 5 points. Emma Hayes. Me. I froze. I hadn't prepared for this. I thought I was here just to sign a waiver saying I didn't contest the distribution of the old tea set, or maybe a box of kitchen towels. Carol gasped, a tiny wounded sound that she quickly swallowed. Robert looked like he had been slapped across the face with a wet fish. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Harrison," Robert said, his voice suddenly thick with forced charm. "There must be a transcription error. Emma is, well, she is adopted. She is my sister Jane's adopted daughter. I am the blood heir." Harrison didn't react to the venom dripping from the word adopted. He just pointed a neat manicured finger at the document. "Page 4, Section B, Secondary Executor, Emma Hayes. The signature matches the validated copy." He looked at me. "Ms. Hayes, do you accept the duties of the secondary executor?" My mouth was dry. My tongue felt like sandpaper. "Yes," I managed, the word barely a whisper. Harrison nodded and pushed a document toward me. "Sign here, verifying you understand the legal responsibilities." As I leaned forward, Robert's elbow shot out and knocked a small crystal water glass off the table. It hit the thick carpet with a dull thud, but didn't break. It just rolled. The sound was loud enough to break the tension, but the tension instantly reformed, sharper than before. "Clumsy," Robert mumbled, not apologizing, not looking at me, just staring at the space where the will rested. I signed the paper, my hand shaking so hard the signature looked like a line drawn in an earthquake. Harrison tucked the executor document away. He cleared his throat again, this time a signal for silence. The clock on the wall, a heavy brass antique, ticked relentlessly. We will now read the last will and testament of Martha B. Hayes, deceased, dated June 14th of this year, Harrison announced. He started with the necessary boilerplate, the stuff that meant nothing, debts, funeral costs, which I had already paid quietly 3 weeks ago using my small savings. They didn't even ask. He droned on about legal definitions and testamentary capacity. It took forever. Every word felt like a physical strain on my chest. I watched Carol carefully. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath her thin skin. She knew the bulk of the estate was the property, the house, 15 acres of prime suburban land, and the investments Grandma had been managing since the 60s. They were waiting for the itemized list, ready to fight over the silver cutlery or the antique sideboard. Harrison turned a page. The paper rustled, the sound immense. Now, regarding the specific bequests, he said. He paused, looking straight ahead. Mrs. Hayes was very clear in her final instructions. She utilized an A-B trust structure to minimize taxation, but the distribution of assets is quite straightforward. Robert leaned forward. The house, Mr. Harrison. Let's address the house first. Harrison didn't acknowledge him. He adjusted his tie. To my son, Robert Hayes, Harrison read, his voice flat. I bestow the contents of my personal safety deposit box at the First National Bank on Elm Street. Contents include family photographs, letters, and the gold cufflink set inherited from his grandfather. Robert blinked. He frowned. That was it? A box of old papers and cufflinks? He opened his mouth to protest, but Harrison just kept reading. To my daughter, Jane Hayes McPherson. Harrison continued. I bestow the family jewelry collection, specifically excluding the engagement ring and the 2 amethyst necklaces, which have been designated elsewhere. Jane wasn't here, but if she were, she'd be ecstatic about the jewelry. Carol, however, looked sick. She was Jane's primary rival. And to my dear granddaughter Tiffany Hayes, Harrison read, looking briefly at the girl who was now staring up from her phone. Alert. I bestow the remainder of the cash funds held in the checking account. After all debts and taxes are settled. He paused. Currently estimated at $22,000. Tiffany managed a small, hopeful smile. $22,000 was a nice chunk of change for a college student. Now it was Carol's turn. She was the only one left among the immediate children. Her breath hitched. She was waiting for the house, the land, the big money. Harrison turned the page again. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a shallow, rasping sound I suddenly realized was Carol breathing. To my daughter, Carol Hayes Sterling, Harrison announced. I bestow my personal collection of first edition classic novels, currently housed in the library at the estate, as she always enjoyed reading. Carol didn't move. Her expression was frozen. The book collection, which was nice, worth maybe $10,000 total, but not the house, not the millions. That's it? Carol whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with disbelief. The house? The land? The trusts? What about the majority assets? Robert straightened up. Mr. Harrison, you have listed 4 beneficiaries. My mother had substantial holdings. The primary estate assets must be distributed now. The property? The stocks? The mutual funds? He was shaking his head, trying to rationalize this clear mistake. It must be divided among the 4 of us. Harrison rested his hands on the papers. He looked over the tops of his reading glasses, his expression finally shifting. A cold, almost professional amusement touched his lips. Mr. Hayes, Harrison said, his voice even. The will is very clear. Mrs. Hayes left very specific bequests to each of you. He picked up the final sheet of paper, the one that looked crispest, most recently printed. The remainder of the estate, Harrison stated, emphasizing the word remainder, meaning all real property, including the primary residence at 478 Oak Ridge Drive, all surrounding acreage, all investment portfolios, including the equity funds, bonds, and managed stock accounts, all remaining tangible goods, and the full contents of the safety deposit box designated Engagement and Amethyst is bequeathed in its entirety to one individual. He stopped. He didn't look up, but I could feel the tension of the family members around me pulling inward, crushing. Carol's face was chalk white. Robert was physically leaning forward, straining to hear the name. That individual, Harrison read, his voice louder now, clearer, savoring the final punchline, is my dear granddaughter, Emma Hayes. The sound that left Carol's throat was not a gasp or a scream. It was a strangled, aborted sound, like she'd just been punched in the solar plexus. Robert jerked back in his chair so fast it scraped violently against the mahogany floor. The brass clock ticked on, indifferent to the sudden collapse of their world. Emma Hayes. My name. The name that had been excluded from every photo, every discussion, every family vacation for 30 years. Now, it was the only name that mattered. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the velvet chair, the sharp edges digging into my palms. I could see Robert's face, mottled red and white, his eyes wide and bulging. That's impossible, Robert choked out. That cannot be legal. Harrison calmly folded the will. It is signed, witnessed, and fully notarized. Mrs. Hayes updated this document very recently, ensuring there was absolutely no ambiguity regarding her final intentions. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. Congratulations, Miss Hayes. I stared at the paperwork on the table. The scratchy cotton of my cheap black dress suddenly felt like armor. Everything they had ever said to me, you don't count. You're not family. You're the charity case. It all dissolved into dust. Carol finally found her voice. It was high-pitched, manic. She was senile. She was confused. We can contest this. She was manipulated. By her. Carol's painted finger shot across the table, shaking violently, pointing straight at me. The charity case manipulated my mother. I didn't move. I just looked at her, at the raw, ugly, naked greed distorting her perfect, expensive face. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen her truly afraid, and the fear was spectacular. Robert slammed his fist on the table. You will hear from my lawyers, Harrison. This is a disgrace. Harrison just sighed, already tired of the commotion. You are free to contest it, Mr. Hayes. But Mrs. Hayes was explicit. She left a separate sealed letter, detailing exactly why she chose this distribution. He reached for the small manila envelope he had set aside earlier. He opened it slowly, extracting a single sheet of heavy, creamy paper. This is not part of the legal will, but it is an accompanying letter of instruction, Harrison said. He cleared his throat. It reads. He paused, adjusting his stance. The room was utterly silent again, save for Carol's shallow, rapid breathing. To my dear children, Robert, Jane, and Carol, you spent 30 years telling Emma she was not family. You excluded her, you mocked her, and you treated her like an unwanted obligation. Despite her tireless devotion to me, you asked for the house to stay with the family line. Well, Emma is the only one who ever behaved like family. Blood doesn't mean a thing if it's poisoned by selfishness. Therefore, I leave the house and everything else to the one person who earned it. Harrison looked up, his face devoid of emotion. He finished the note. Emma is the only one who counts. The rest of you may now leave. The words hung heavy in the air, a physical force that knocked the wind out of the three adults. Robert pushed his chair back violently, the sound screaming across the floor. He was breathing hard, like he'd run a marathon. He looked at me, his face twisting into something I had never seen before. Pure, violent hatred mixed with sudden, horrifying desperation. You scheming little bitch, he spat, his voice low and dangerous. I felt the blood drain from my head. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the papers, at the words that gave me everything, and at the faces of the people who realized they had lost it all. Tiffany, sensing the immediate shift from inheritance to catastrophe, started to cry, a fake, dramatic sob. Carol's eyes fixed on mine. They were not the eyes of an ant. They were the eyes of a starving animal who had just watched its last meal walk away. You won't keep it, she whispered, her voice shaking. We'll tear you apart. You won't get away with this. I finally lifted my gaze from the table, meeting Carol's stare. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs, but a cold, clear stream of adrenaline was running through my veins. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet power. I had nothing to say to them. They were ghosts already. Robert lunged slightly, taking a half step toward me, his hands clenched into fists the size of small hammers. "Mr. Hayes," Harrison warned, standing up quickly, positioning himself between us. "Security is on its way. You should vacate the premises." Robert stopped, staring at me one last time, a terrifying promise of revenge in his eyes. I watched them scramble, Tiffany pulling her sobbing mother, Carol grabbing her purse, Robert snatching his cufflinks and letters off the table. They stumbled out the door, the sound of their desperate, hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway. The office door clicked shut behind them. I sat there, alone, with Mr. Harrison surrounded by mahogany, velvet, and a silence that finally felt clean. I was shaking. I was rich. I was terrified. Harrison sat back down, adjusting his tie. That was predictable. He looked at me with a small, genuine smile this time. "Your grandmother was a very decisive woman, Ms. Hayes. She knew exactly what she was doing. She instructed me specifically to call the police if anyone became overly aggressive after the reading. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. I just stared at the small manila envelope, the one that held the final words from the only person who had ever truly loved me. "She wanted you to be safe, Emma," Harrison said softly, using my first name for the first time. "And she wanted you to have leverage. She knew they would try to erase you again." He slid the stack of documents toward me, the title deeds, the investment summaries, the sheer, overwhelming weight of a massive fortune. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool paper. It felt like fire. I looked at the window. The sky was bright blue, brutally honest. Outside, the world was normal. Inside, my life had just been detonated. "Mr. Harrison," I managed, my voice raw. What do I do now?" He leaned forward, his face serious. "You call a different lawyer, Emma. You call a team of lawyers, because they are not going to stop. They just lost everything, and they believe it belongs to them by right of birth. You are now the target. You have to be ready." He paused, then added, "They will remind you of everything they think you are. Adopted, an outsider, a nobody. And they will try to make you forget who your grandmother knew you were. A Hayes." I picked up the manila envelope, pulling out the letter. Grandma Martha's elegant looping handwriting filled the page. "P.S. Sell Carol's books if she makes a fuss. Use the money for good shoes." A tear finally escaped, running down my cheek and hitting the signature line on the document I was supposed to be signing. I closed my eyes, trying to inhale the calm Harrison projected, trying to anchor myself in the reality of the paper in my hand. But the image of Robert's face, twisted with hate, was burned behind my eyelids. I had the money. I had the house. But I also had a war, and I had never been trained to fight. I opened my eyes, the sun hitting the mahogany, throwing sharp golden beams across the room. I felt cold, utterly, terribly cold. Despite the summer heat, the door burst open. Not the police. It was Robert, back again, ignoring the receptionist. His face contorted into a mask of pure, uncontrolled rage. He saw me, sitting there with the papers. He saw Harrison. "I need to talk to her, Harrison," Robert snarled, stepping into the room. "Now." Harrison stood up, firm. "You need to leave, Mr. Hayes. I am not leaving until that adopted parasite understands that she has stolen my family's money," Robert roared, taking another step. I gripped the chair tighter. "It wasn't stolen," I heard myself say, the words startlingly clear, echoing the lawyer's earlier statement. "It was given." Robert stopped dead, staring at me. He had expected me to cower, to cry, to apologize. His eyes narrowed. He looked around the room, searching for something, anything, to hurt me with. His gaze landed on the antique brass clock on the wall. He lifted his arm, roaring in frustration. I flinched, waiting for the impact, waiting for the smash. Harrison moved faster than I thought possible for a small man. He grabbed Robert's arm just as the fist started moving toward the wall. "Don't do it, Robert," Harrison said, his voice surprisingly deep and dangerous. "That clock is over 100 years old. It's part of the estate. It belongs to Emma now." Robert froze, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. He looked from the clock to Harrison, to me. The realization that every single object in the room now belonged to the girl he called the parasite seemed to finally break him. He dropped his arm. He didn't speak. He just backed away slowly, his eyes locked on mine. He was promising ruin without saying a single word. He turned and bolted, running out the door, the sound of his expensive leather shoes frantic on the marble hallway floor. Harrison sat back down, adjusting his collar. "That was your first warning," he said, pushing the pen toward me again. "Sign the last document, Emma. You own everything now, including the responsibility for what happens next." I picked up the heavy pen. My hand didn't shake this time. The paper felt solid beneath my fingers. I signed the last line. The silence returned. Heavy. Absolute. I looked at Harrison. The weight of the house, the money, the hatred, settling over me like a suffocating shroud. I was rich. I was alone. And they were coming for me. The thought didn't scare me as much as it should have. 30 years of being invisible had prepared me for this. They had thrown me out of the family. Grandma had just given me the keys to the kingdom. I stood up, the chair creaking under my weight. My cheap shoes finally felt like the foundation of a fortress. "We start the defense today," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Harrison nodded. "Today." I looked at the spot where Robert had stood, promising violence. I wasn't the charity case anymore. I was the owner. I was the executor. And I was the real Hayes. I walked out of the office, the hot street air hitting me. I didn't look back. I had a war to plan. The hot street air hit me like a slap. It smelled like exhaust and old cooking oil. I felt the sweat break out instantly across my back, sticking the thin cotton shirt to my skin. I stopped walking right outside the glass door of Harrison's office building. The sidewalk was cracked and uneven. The sun bounced off a parked car's windshield, blinding me for a second. I dug my fingernails into my palms. I was still shaking, but it wasn't the old fear. It was a buzzing, raw energy that felt too big for my bones. I wasn't walking away from the lawyer's office. I was walking into the fight. Harrison was right behind me, his tie slightly askew. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a man who'd just signed up for trench warfare. "The driver is coming," he said, his voice low and tight. "You're going straight to the house, Emma. We need to secure the physical asset first. If we leave it empty for 24 hours, Robert or someone else will try to squat." Squat. The word was ugly and cheap. The idea of Robert's big, clumsy body inside Grandma's quiet, perfect rooms made my stomach turn over. "I need coffee," I said. My throat was dry, tasting like plaster dust. "You need security," Harrison countered. He didn't argue. He just stated the facts, flat and hard. He grabbed my elbow, guiding me toward the curb. The car pulled up. It wasn't a sleek black sedan. It was a sturdy, nondescript gray SUV, tinted windows all around. Practical. Safe. A man with a neck thicker than my thigh got out and opened the back door. He wore a simple polo shirt, but his eyes were sharp and constantly moving. Security. I slid into the back seat. The leather was cool and smelled faintly of new car cleaner and something metallic. Harrison got in beside me. "This is Gary," Harrison said. "He stays with you until we hire a full team. He's ex-military. He's listening to everything." Gary nodded once in the rearview mirror. No smile. I looked down at my hands. They were still the same hands. Knuckles a little rough from years of waitressing and cleaning other people's messes. But now, those hands held the deed to everything. "I feel sick," I admitted, whispering it. "That's adrenaline," Harrison said. "Use it. Robert won't wait. He's probably already talking to his own shyster. They'll argue undue influence, mental incompetence, coerced signature, standard playbook." "Grandma was sharp as a tack," I snapped. "Doesn't matter. They'll flood the court with paperwork trying to tie this up for years. We fight fire with fire. You are the executor. That means you control the money, the assets, and the access immediately. That's our advantage. Speed." The drive took 20 minutes. Every street sign, every passing building seemed sharper, louder. I was seeing the world through a new lens, a lens of ownership. The city felt less hostile knowing I had a massive, tangible asset backing me up. We turned onto Hayes Lane. The road was gravel here, shaded by old oak trees that dropped huge, dark leaves onto the asphalt. The air instantly cooled, smelling of damp earth and moss. The Hayes estate wasn't ostentatious, not in the way new money tries to be. It was deep, silent wealth. The house sat far back from the road, partially obscured by a tall wrought iron fence that hadn't been painted in 30 years. It was old money, letting the decay show just enough to prove its age. Gary stopped the car outside the gate. He didn't wait for Harrison to give instructions. He was already out, checking the lock. "The code," Harrison prompted me. I rattled off the 6 digits Grandma had given me. The only family member who ever needed a code to enter what was supposed to be her family home. The family members who were real just used the side door. The gate whined open. Gary drove us slowly up the long, curving driveway. The Hayes house. It was 3 stories of solid gray stone, wrapped in climbing ivy that clung stubbornly to the mortar. It looked exactly the same as the last time I'd been here, 2 weeks before Grandma died. Silent, imposing. Harrison and Gary scanned the property. Nothing moved. The only sound was the crunch of the SUV tires on the gravel. We parked near the main entrance. A huge wooden door painted a deep hunter green. Gary was the first one out. He checked the rose bushes. He checked the windows. Harrison handed me a heavy brass key. It was cool in my palm. The master key. "Execute your right, Emma. You are home." I approached the door. I had been in this house 1,000 times, always through the kitchen entrance, always told to wipe my feet 1,000 extra times, always careful not to lean on anything. I was the dirt tracked in from outside. I lifted the heavy key. It slid into the lock with a satisfying, deep thunk. I turned it. The door swung inward easily, silently. The air inside hit me first. Cold, dry, smelling of beeswax, dust, and Grandma's faint, beloved perfume, cloves and sandalwood. The entryway was enormous. A sweeping staircase dominated the space, its dark wood banister polished to a mirror sheen. To the left was the formal parlor, where I had never been allowed to sit. To the right, the library, where I had only been allowed to dust the top shelves because I was the tallest. I walked straight into the middle of the foyer and stopped. The marble floor felt like ice through the thin soles of my shoes. I stood perfectly still, closing my eyes. I felt the house settle around me, acknowledging the true weight of the deed in my pocket. Harrison stayed quiet, letting me take it in. Gary stood at the door, facing outward. This house was mine. Every creak, every shadow, every overpriced antique. I opened my eyes. We need cameras. Today. And a fence company. That old iron fence is decorative. We need 6-foot chain link behind it until the court settles. Harrison pulled out his phone immediately. Good. Practical. Gary, start securing the ground floor windows. Harrison Law will cover the initial outlay. Send the invoices directly to the Hayes estate account. He paused, looking at me. Which, by the way, you control completely. The power surge was almost physical. It went straight from my head down to my toes. Control. We spent the next 4 hours moving like a military unit. I didn't sit down once. We walked through every room, cataloging, checking locks, and setting up temporary alarms. The house was exactly as Grandma had left it. Her reading glasses were still on the side table in the sunroom, next to a half-finished book of poetry. Her favorite Afghan was draped over the back of the settee. In the kitchen, the huge, industrial-sized refrigerator hummed. I opened it. It was bare except for a pitcher of iced tea and a bowl of aging fruit. The kitchen was the only place I had ever felt safe here, where Grandma would teach me how to roll pastry, and never once mentioned that my mother, her daughter, wished I had never been born. We walked up the sweeping staircase. The stairs were wide, deep steps that had been worn smooth by generations of Hayes feet that weren't mine. I walked past my mother's old room, past Uncle George's empty guest suite. I went straight to Grandma's master suite at the end of the hall. It was enormous. Windows faced 3 directions, giving a view of the entire sprawling backyard and the woods beyond. The 4-poster bed was made impeccably. On the mahogany dresser sat a small, leather-bound jewelry box. I opened it. It held only two things: a single, delicate gold locket and a small, folded piece of paper. I picked up the locket. It was heavy. Inside, there was a tiny, faded picture of a young woman who looked vaguely like me, and a man I didn't recognize. I unfolded the paper. It was Grandma's handwriting, shaky toward the end, but clear. "They will try to tell you that you are not one of us. They are wrong. You are the only one who truly counts. You carry the best parts. The locket belonged to your grandmother, Amelia Hayes. She was mine before any of them were. Remember that, Emma. You are real." I swallowed, the tightness in my throat almost choking me. Amelia Hayes. That was the name I had seen buried deep in the adoption papers Harrison pulled up. My biological grandmother, before I was adopted into this family. The realization hit me. Grandma Hayes, the woman who raised my mother, knew I wasn't blood, but she had chosen me anyway. She had chosen me over her own daughter and son, and now she had given me the key to their entire world. I tucked the note and the locket deep into my jeans pocket. "Harrison," I called out, my voice thick. He came quickly. "What is it?" "I'm staying here tonight. Alone." "Absolutely not. We discussed this. You are a target. I am the owner," I countered, the words tasting like metal. "I need to be here. I need to hold the line. Robert will come, and I want him to find me here." Harrison looked grave. He looked at Gary, who just shrugged. "I can sleep in the hall," Gary offered flatly. "No," I said. "You take the guest suite near the stairs. I want a line of defense, but I need to feel this. I need to be here when they realize I'm not running." Harrison sighed. He knew he couldn't stop me. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was personal. "Fine. We stock the kitchen. You don't leave the premises. I'll send a full security team rotation starting at 0600. The sun set over the Hayes estate. It was a golden, hazy light that filtered through the massive oak trees, making long, shifting shadows dance across the manicured lawn. The lawn that Uncle George always insisted I wasn't allowed to walk on. I sat in the parlor, the formal, velvet-draped, never-use-this-room parlor, with a mug of instant coffee and the house phone. Gary was somewhere on the second floor, doing a final sweep. Harrison had gone back to the city, promising to work all night on injunctions. The house was eerily silent, a silence that was usually filled with the low hum of Grandma's presence, the quiet turning of pages, the clinking of her spoon in a teacup. Now, it was just the massive, heavy silence of expectation. I called my old landlord, told him I was moving out immediately. I told him he could keep the deposit. I didn't even care. The thought of going back to that cramped, stale apartment was impossible. Then I sat and waited for the inevitable. It didn't take long. It was 9:30 in the evening. I was reading over the inventory list Harrison had left me, 3 pages detailing the sheer volume of antiques and art that were now my responsibility, when the phone rang. It wasn't the low, pleasant chime of the main line. It was the harsh, aggressive ring of the exterior gate intercom. I stood up, putting the inventory list down on a silk-covered ottoman. My heart started that heavy, rhythmic thump against my ribs again. Gary materialized instantly, silent as a ghost, standing in the archway of the parlor. "I'll take it," I told him. I walked over to the intercom receiver mounted on the wall. I took a deep breath. I pressed the button. "Hello?" My voice was steady, too steady. The static crackled for a moment. Then Robert's voice, sharp and laced with alcohol, came through. "Emma, you answer the damn gate. What kind of stunt is this? Open the gate right now." I could picture him out there, probably leaning his considerable weight against the iron bars, his face red and slick with sweat, the expensive linen shirt he always wore wrinkled and stained, furious. "Robert," I said, using his name, the name I was always forbidden from saying without a title, Uncle Robert, in the past. "This is private property. You are trespassing." The silence on the other end was absolute, crushing. He wasn't used to this. He was used to me shrinking, to me apologizing for existing. "Trespassing?" he finally roared. "That is my mother's house. You pathetic little leech. That is the Hayes family home, and you are not family. Open this gate before I call the police on you. Go ahead, I said, slowly and clearly. Call the police. I would advise against it, however. The police will inform you that this property is legally controlled by the estate of Eleanor Hayes. I am the sole executor and beneficiary. Any attempt to breach the perimeter will be treated as forcible entry. I have security and video evidence recording. I heard a sound like something hitting the metal gate. A dull clang. He must have punched the iron. You think this is funny? You think some shyster lawyer can undo 50 years of lineage because my mother went senile and signed a paper? We'll destroy you in court, Emma. We will rip every single dime out of your hands. You can certainly try, I replied. I felt nothing but ice in my veins. The years of quiet exclusion. The holidays I spent alone. The family photos I was cropped out of. All of it was fueling this cold, hard resolve. Robert, I continued, making sure the cadence was slow, lawyerly, and utterly devoid of emotion. The will has been filed and executed. You have been notified. You have no legal standing here. You have 48 hours to clear your personal belongings from the garage storage unit, the one marked Robert's fishing gear, before they are legally considered abandoned and disposed of by the estate. That hit him. That specific, petty detail. The fishing gear he hadn't used in 10 years but refused to throw away. It was a pinprick showing I knew the house better than he did. You venomous bitch, he spat. Good night, Robert, I said. I pressed the button, cutting the connection. The sudden silence was jarring. Gary stepped forward, looking entirely unfazed. He's still out there, pacing by the gate. He can pace all night, I said, walking back toward the parlor. I stopped halfway, turning to face the huge, dark window. I could feel his rage, a hot, palpable wave rolling toward the house. Did you hear the threat? I asked Gary. I heard everything. We're ready. I nodded. I knew Robert wouldn't try anything tonight. Not with the threat of police and the implied presence of muscle. But tomorrow, the legal war would begin. I went back to the silk ottoman and picked up the inventory list. I needed to focus on the numbers. The numbers were concrete. The hate was just noise. The next morning, the sun rose, bright and unforgiving. I slept badly, curled up on the huge four-poster bed, the silence of the massive room oppressive. I kept waking up, heart hammering, thinking I heard footsteps outside. At 6:00 a.m. sharp, the security shift change happened. 2 new men, as quiet and imposing as Gary, took positions. Harrison called at 7:00 a.m. His voice was clipped. It started. Robert filed a motion for an immediate stay on asset distribution, claiming you exerted undue influence. We expected this. I already countered with the video evidence of the reading and your lack of financial connection to Eleanor Hayes prior to her death. It's weak, but it buys them time. What do I need to do? I asked, sipping the lukewarm coffee I'd made in Grandma's kitchen. You need to live like the owner, Emma. That means taking control. I need you to do 2 things today. First, go to the bank. Transfer all liquid assets into a new, single account under the name of the estate, with you as the sole authorized signatory. Second, call the utility companies. Change every account. Electric, water, gas, cable, everything, into the estate's name. Cut them off from the paper trail. Utilities? Yes. They will try to access the house through bills, through mail, through any connection point they can find. Seal the fortress. I spent the entire day on the phone. The sheer bureaucratic weight of the Hayes estate was staggering. Millions of dollars moving from one account to another. The bank manager, who had handled the Hayes family affairs for 40 years, sounded deeply uncomfortable talking to me, the newly appointed queen. "Welcome, Ms. Hayes," he'd said, the title tripping over his tongue. I corrected him. "It's Miss Emma. And thank you, Mr. Dubois. Just confirming the transfer of $4.7 million is complete." $4.7 million. Just liquid cash. By the time I hung up with the last utility company, the one handling the archaic landline phone, my ear was sore, and my voice was raw. I was the owner, but ownership was just endless paperwork and the constant, dull throb of responsibility. 2 days later, the second wave hit. This time, it wasn't Robert. It was my mother, Lydia. I was in the dining room, A room I'd never eaten in, with a table that could seat 20 people, going through a box of old tax records. The gate intercom rang again. I walked the long distance to the wall and hit the button. "Hello," I said. A woman's voice, sharp and thin, replied, "Let me in, Emma. It's your mother." My mother. Lydia Hayes. The woman who had told me at age 16 that she never understood why her mother insisted on keeping the charity case around. "You don't live here, Mother," I stated flatly. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my childhood home. I need to get my things. And I need to talk to you about this ridiculous, fraudulent will. I know that old man Harrison has put ideas in your head, but we are your real family, Emma. My belongings are here," I said. "Yours are not. My clothes, my jewelry, my baby pictures. They're all in the attic," she cried, the familiar, hysterical edge creeping into her voice. "I'm currently performing an inventory of all contents of the estate," I informed her. "Any items found that are not legally documented as belonging to Eleanor Hayes will be placed in secure storage until the court settles the claim of undue influence. If you have an inventory list of your personal property, you may submit it to my legal counsel, Harrison Law." She started to cry. The theatrical, high-pitched sobs I hadn't heard since I moved out at 18. "Emma, please. I'm your mother. I carried you. I raised you. How can you do this to me?" The years flashed through my mind. The public humiliations, the private cruelty, the way she had always introduced me as my adopted daughter, Emma, who is just staying with us. The forced smile, the cold, absent eyes. "You never carried me, Mother," I said, my voice low and dark. "You adopted me when I was 3, and you never raised me. Grandma did, and Grandma made her intentions very clear in writing." I didn't wait for her reply. I pressed the disconnect button. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence of the house. I felt the relief wash over me, the sweet, clean taste of finally telling her the truth without fear of consequence. Gary appeared again. "She's backing out of the driveway. She's yelling into her phone." "Good," I said. "Let them yell." The fighting was relentless. Harrison and I spent hours in phone meetings, reviewing documents. Robert and Lydia were challenging everything: the mental state of Grandma, the validity of the witnesses, the age of the paper itself. They were throwing sand into the gears of the legal machine, hoping to wear me down. But I had the house, I had the money, and I had the time. 1 week into the new reality, I was sitting in the massive mahogany-paneled library. It was full of books I would never read, leather-bound volumes that smelled like history. I was organizing Grandma's personal papers, a tedious, detail-oriented task that required intense focus. I found a second box, tucked under a blanket in the back of a cedar chest. This one was different. It wasn't tax records. It was letters. A stack of letters tied with a thin, faded blue ribbon, all addressed to Eleanor Hayes, Grandma. All written in the same neat, flowing script. They were dated from 40 years ago. I pulled one out. The handwriting was beautiful. The return address was a small town in rural Ohio. I started reading. The letters weren't from family. They were from a man named Thomas. Thomas, who wrote about his life, his small farm, his hopes. Thomas, who was clearly in love with Eleanor Hayes, my grandmother. I read quickly, skimming through dozens of pages of intimate details. They had met years ago, before her marriage to Grandpa Hayes. They were supposed to run away together, but Eleanor had panicked, choosing the security and wealth of the Hayes name over Thomas. The last letter stopped me cold. It was dated 5 years after she married Grandpa Hayes, shortly after my mother, Lydia, was born. "Eleanor, I can't stop thinking about you. I heard about the baby. I know I shouldn't write this, but I have to ask. I have moved closer to the city. I am stable now. If you ever need anything, if you ever want to fix the mistake we both made, I am here. I promised you I would always protect you, even if you wouldn't let me love you. Please just send me a sign. I won't bother you again." There was a postscript scribbled in a different ink, darker, more recent. It was Grandma Hayes's hand. I should have written back. I should have fixed it sooner. But I finally found him. Not Thomas, but Thomas's blood. The truth always finds its way home. I put the letter down on the massive library table. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. I realized what I was looking at. The locket, the picture inside, the woman who looked like me, Amelia Hayes, my biological grandmother, and the man next to her, Thomas. I suddenly knew why Grandma Hayes had written that note about Amelia Hayes, why she had chosen me. It wasn't just about the adoption papers. It wasn't just about spite against Lydia and Robert. Grandma Hayes had chosen me because I was a second chance. I was the blood of the man she truly loved. I wasn't just the adopted granddaughter. I was a direct link to a past she regretted leaving behind. I was the ultimate final act of rebellion against the Hayes family she had married into and grown to resent. I wasn't a Hayes at all. I was Thomas's family, the lineage she should have had. I called Harrison, my voice tight. "I need you to pull the records on Amelia Hayes again. And Thomas," I said. "And I need to see the original will documents. The signatures. The signatures are airtight, Emma. We went over this. I know, but I need to see if she used her full legal name, or if she used Eleanor Thomas Hayes." The next morning, Harrison arrived with the documents. We spread them out on the dining room table. The lighting was poor, but I didn't need light. I knew what I was looking for. On the last page of the codicil, the paper that gave me everything, the signature was bold, yet slightly shaky. Eleanor A. Hayes. Harrison pointed to the A. "It's been her legal middle initial forever. What's the point?" I opened the jewelry box and pulled out the small folded note. I slid it across the table to him. He read it. He looked up, his brow furrowed. "Amelia Hayes? Your biological grandmother?" I nodded, then pulled out the letters, the ones tied with the blue ribbon. I showed him the final letter from Thomas. Harrison read the whole thing. He read Grandma Hayes's small, frantic postscript. When he finished, he sat back in the massive dining chair. He let out a slow, long breath. "You know what this means, don't you, Emma? She chose me over them," I whispered. "No, it's more than that. This is the narrative. This is the emotional leverage we need. We don't just fight them on legality. We fight them on intent. We present the fact that she cut them out not because she was senile, but because she finally acknowledged her true allegiance, that she saw you, Emma, as the true extension of the family she wished she had built." Harrison looked energized. This was the story that would devastate Robert and Lydia in court. A simple, undeniable love story spanning 40 years, culminating in a final perfect act of rejection against the family who had caused her so much misery. "This changes everything," Harrison said, stacking the letters neatly. "We will file these as evidence of intent. Their claims of undue influence just got blown out of the water. This is a deliberate, reasoned choice based on lifelong emotional connections." The court hearing was set for 2 weeks later. A preliminary injunction hearing. Robert and Lydia were trying to freeze the accounts. I sat between Harrison and Gary, watching them enter the courtroom. Lydia wore a severe black suit, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked like a predator. Robert was flanked by his own lawyer, a slick man with a gold watch and a perpetual smirk. Robert caught my eye across the room. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked desperate. The hearing was dry, tedious, and technical. Robert's lawyer argued that Eleanor Hayes was suffering from early-stage dementia and had been financially isolated by Harrison, allowing me, the non-relative, to swoop in. When it was our turn, Harrison stood up. He didn't focus on the numbers. He focused on the narrative. He submitted the letters. He submitted the locket and the note. He spoke for 20 minutes, calmly detailing the decades of emotional distance between Eleanor and her biological children, the repeated attempts by the family to exclude me, and Eleanor Hayes's final, deliberate act of correcting her life's trajectory by vesting her entire estate in the bloodline of Thomas. "The plaintiff suggests undue influence," Harrison stated, looking directly at the judge. "We argue the opposite. This was the only act in Eleanor Hayes's entire life that was not influenced by the social and financial constraints of the Hayes name. This was a choice made purely from the heart, finally claiming the family connection she had always yearned for." The air in the courtroom dropped several degrees. Lydia was staring at Harrison, her mouth slightly open. Robert's face had gone the color of old milk. Harrison wasn't just defending the will. He was exposing their mother's deep, long-standing unhappiness. He was telling the whole world that Eleanor Hayes wished she had never been a Hayes. The judge looked bored, then intrigued. He picked up the letters and began to read. The courtroom was silent save for the rustle of paper. When the judge finally looked up, he adjusted his glasses. "Counselors," he said, his voice flat. "The claim of undue influence is highly suggestive of fraud and coercion. The defense, however, has provided compelling evidence of long-term intent and complex emotional motivation on the part of the deceased." He looked at Robert and Lydia's lawyer. "I will not grant a stay on asset distribution at this time. The estate of Eleanor Hayes remains under the control of the executor, Miss Emma Hayes. I suggest the plaintiffs reconsider the viability of this case." He hit the gavel. Thwack. It was over. For now. We walked out of the courtroom. Robert and Lydia rushed past us, their faces masks of pure, distilled hatred. "We won the first battle," Harrison said, clapping my shoulder. "But they won't quit. They can't afford to." We went back to the house. I had expected to feel victorious, triumphant. Instead, I felt drained. The fight had taken everything out of me. I sat alone in the sunroom, looking out over the sprawling back lawn, the lawn I was finally allowed to walk on. I pulled out the locket and held it tightly in my hand. Thomas's family. My family. The next few months were a blur of depositions, paperwork, and legal fees. Robert and Lydia continued to fight, but the narrative had shifted. Every time they argued that Grandma was mentally unsound, Harrison countered with the love letters. Their desperation became obvious, their claims weaker. The bills piled up. The money was flowing out fast, paying lawyers and security teams. But it was my money flowing out to secure what was mine. Finally, 6 months after the will reading, Harrison called me. "They settled," he said. "Robert and Lydia withdrew their claim. They agreed to pay their own legal fees. It's over, Emma. The house is yours. The money is yours. The land is yours. Everything is clear." The line went silent. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the static. "It's over," I repeated. The words tasted foreign. I walked out of the sunroom and onto the back porch. The air was cool and crisp. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. I looked out over the property, the Hayes house, now my house. I looked down at the hand holding the locket. It was heavy, weighted with history and choice. I had won the war. I had the house, the money, the lineage I never knew I had. But I was standing on a porch that used to be full of quiet comfort, now filled with echoing silence. Grandma was gone, and I was alone in a fortress built entirely out of spite and love. I walked down the 3 wide stone steps and put my feet on the lawn. I walked straight across the grass, toward the old oak trees at the edge of the property line. I walked until I reached the tall, thick fence that Harrison had insisted on erecting, the 6-foot chain-link fence, a stark line of gray metal separating the Hayes world from the rest of the world. I placed my hand on the cold mesh of the fence. I was finally inside, and I was utterly, completely locked in.